For the first couple hundred years of America's existence, there was one constant: the West. It was this endless horizon of free land, of opportunity, of totally reinventing yourself. And then, poof, in what felt like a blink of an eye, it was gone. Today, we're diving into that exact moment, the moment the American frontier officially closed, and the powerful idea that tried to make sense of it all.
That's it. A simple, almost boring statement from the Census Bureau. But with those few words, a core piece of the American experience, of the American identity, was officially over.
Now, you gotta understand, this was way more than just lines on a map. This announcement sent a shockwave through the country's psyche. It was a huge psychological turning point. For the very first time, Americans had to think about a future where the country wasn't just constantly getting bigger. So the big question, the one that kind of hung in the air, was, okay, the West is settled, so who are we now? Well, the most powerful answer to that question came from a pretty young historian from Wisconsin, a guy named Frederick Jackson Turner. And he saw this moment not just as an ending, but as the perfect opportunity to figure out what the whole westward journey had all been about. And I mean, the setting couldn't have been more perfect. It's 1893 at the Chicago World's Fair, this huge, grand celebration of American progress and technology. And in walks Turner, who actually grew up in a place where the pioneering life was still a fresh memory. And he gets up and basically offers this huge, sweeping explanation for the entire American story up to that point. So what was this big idea? At its core, what became known as the frontier thesis was actually pretty simple, but really profound. He argued that the whole experience of taming the wilderness, that constant push west, that was the furnace, the thing that forged the American character and made it so completely different from its European roots. Okay, so Turner's whole thesis really boils down to a few key claims. He said the frontier created these tough, self-reliant individuals. He argued it acted like a safety valve, right? A place for restless people to go so they wouldn't cause trouble back east. And crucially, he said it created a uniquely American form of democracy, one built not on old European traditions, but on the equalizing force of the wilderness. And with its closing, he made a bold declaration. The first chapter of American history was officially over. And, you can hear it right in his own words. For Turner, the connection was crystal clear. The rough, antisocial life out on the frontier forced people to depend on themselves, and that powerful spirit of individualism became the absolute bedrock of American democracy. This was an idea that people loved. It just resonated so deeply with how the nation saw itself. Okay, but here's the thing. As powerful and popular as Turner's idea was, it was also, a myth. A really compelling one, for sure, but a myth. Modern historians are quick to point out that his vision of the frontier was just so incredibly narrow. It was pretty much all about white guys, and it completely overlooked the huge complexity of who was actually there.
And you can see the contrast. It's just so stark right here. On one side, you've got Turner's romantic idea of the frontiersman, strong, individualistic, a little rough around the edges. But the reality of the West? Man, it was a messy, complex collision of all these different cultures. It was a place of intense conflict, not some simple story of a settler versus the wilderness. It was like all the diversity of the old world got dropped into a new and often very brutal landscape. So who exactly got left out of this story? Well, a lot of people. We're talking about literally hundreds of distinct Native American cultures, Hispanic communities that had been there for generations, immigrants from Mexico and Asia, Black Americans escaping the brutal realities of the South, all sorts of European immigrants, and groups like the Mormons who were just looking for a safe place to be. The West was built by all of them. So here's the thing. It almost didn't matter if Turner's version was 100% fact or just a myth. The idea that the frontier was closed created this deep national anxiety. If the very thing that made America so dynamic and energetic was suddenly gone, what was going to happen to the country's character, to its future? And this was the core of the crisis. See, the frontier wasn't just a bunch of land. It was a powerful symbol of infinite possibility. It was basically the physical proof of the American dream. And losing it, it felt like losing a piece of the country's soul. So what on earth could possibly fill that massive void? So this anxiety, it immediately brought up some huge questions about where the nation was headed. First up was foreign policy.
The whole idea of manifest destiny had pushed the country across the continent. So, with no more continent to conquer, would that same energy now turn outwards? Would America start looking to build an overseas empire?
Then you had the economy. American-style capitalism had really thrived in a country where it felt like there were endless resources and new markets just over the next hill. Without the West constantly feeding it new resources and new markets, how could that system keep going? Would the government have to get more involved?
And finally, there was the massive challenge of just governing. America wasn't an expanding project anymore. It was a settled, complicated, and incredibly diverse country. So, how do you build a fair democracy for all these incredibly different communities now that they were all here to stay? For all the critiques, and there are a lot of them, Turner's thesis has had this unbelievably long life. Why? Because it perfectly captured a myth, a story that Americans really wanted to believe about themselves, that they were a unique nation of rugged individualists, forged in the wild, open spaces. And let's be clear, this wasn't some stuffy academic debate. Turner's ideas totally soaked into American culture. I mean, think about all the Hollywood westerns, all the political speeches. His thesis championed these core values of self-help and free enterprise. It even influenced presidents who started talking about finding new frontiers to conquer. It became absolutely essential to the image of a strong, independent America. But here's a really fascinating twist that came out of all this. The very act of saying the frontier was closed made people suddenly realize that the wilderness wasn't infinite. All this anxiety about the wilderness disappearing, well, it actually sparked the conservation movement. The thinking was, if the wild is almost gone, then we'd better protect what's left. And that's what led to the creation of the first national parks, like Yellowstone, to preserve a piece of that frontier forever. And all of this leaves us with one big final question that's kind of echoed through American history ever since. If Turner was right, even a little bit, if that frontier experience really was the source of America's unique character and drive, then does the nation always need a new frontier, whether it's in science or technology or space or even global influence, to feel like itself?